Again, welcome everyone. So excited to have you with us this afternoon on our next installment of our coffee break webinar series. Hopefully you have a nice hot cup of coffee with you and ready to learn a lot of great information in our short time together. If you don't know, I am Lana Rux. I am Principal Consultant with the Rux Group, and the Rux Group is a research and evaluation firm that gathers, analyzes, and interprets data to enable our clients to measure the impact of their work. We were formed in 2008, and over the past several years, we've worked primarily with higher ed and workforce development grants on projects funded by the National Science Foundation, Department of Education, Department of Labor, as well as projects funded by foundations. Before we get into our conversation today, let me create a little bit of context. You've probably heard of the phrase an earthquake-proof building. An earthquake-proof building is such that it was designed, intentionally designed by engineers to be able to withstand the force or the impact of when an earthquake occurs. So it's built with adaptability and flexibility and what engineers call resilience to be able to withstand an earthquake and not be severely damaged. We liken that to creating change-quake-proof projects and project teams. And in the same way, thinking about how do you actually intentionally design projects and project teams so that they're change-quake-proof and creating adaptability, flexibility so that they're resilient. So with us today, I am absolutely thrilled to have Betsy McIntyre, who is Director of the Tristate Energy and Advanced Manufacturing, or TEAM Consortium, to talk about her experiences and knowledge in regards to creating change-quake-proof projects. We've had the privilege of working with Betsy for the last 2 years on evaluating portions of the TEAM Consortium work, and really enjoyed the conversations and feel like I've had master classes from her on leading change management initiatives. So let me turn over to Betsy to provide additional background on herself as well as more information about the TEAM Consortium. Betsy?
Great, thanks, Lana. The TEAM Consortium is a public-private partnership in the states of Ohio, Pennsylvania, West Virginia. The overall goal of the partnership is to ensure that there is an adequate supply of properly skilled workers for those sectors as we move into a really exciting time in economic development in the tri-state region. So the partnership itself is organized into working groups with each stakeholder group kind of working on their own set of tasks, and then the entire partnership coming together several times a year to align that work, the result of which has been creating very visible, understandable career pathways among the higher ed institutions for the workforce boards, et cetera. So it's been a very productive group. And if there's any best practices or lessons that we've learned that can be helpful to all of you, we're happy to share.
Great, thank you for that context. So in thinking about what our objectives are for today's webinar, you may recall that when you registered for the coffee break webinar today that you were asked if you had any questions or if there was something in particular that you want to cover during this webinar. And so we took those comments and questions and organized them really around 3 different themes. So we're going to focus in on one, how do you increase project resiliency? And then we're going to talk about best practices around engaging with partners. And then finally, we're going to talk about dealing with disruption and some insights in regards to dealing with disruption. And of course, we want to make sure that we answer your questions. So if you still have outstanding questions that weren't originally posed or that emerged during the webinar today, please use the question function to be able to ask those questions. And as always, we have Elise Hopes, our outreach coordinator, with us, who will help facilitate that portion of the webinar. So let's go ahead and get started. Let me create a little bit of a context around the challenge that I think that people were sharing around the first question, the first topic that we're going to explore together. So we know that for many projects require very broad changes and that to be able to effectively implement those projects and initiatives, that some of those changes are bigger and broader than what was originally expected, so that there's a change that's expected and then there's a change that's unexpected. And so then it seems as though that sometimes project teams really struggle with managing and implementing change management initiatives and principles. So the question really is around then, how can initiatives be made more resilient such that the change that is sought is actually achieved and not hindered by obstacles? So I know, Betsy, in talking with you, that you've talked about these kind of four different elements in regards to building resiliency, focusing on assets, using good data, tapping the quality people, and using good judgment. Would you be able to talk more about each of these key components?
Sure. Thanks. It's worth reiterating what Lana said about the different types of change, because I'm going to assume that change that is predictable, that you've been able to plan for, is just going to be embedded into your project. And as I say, you can make plans and adjust as you go, and really kind of talk about what are the things you can do that help you take those unexpected things that get thrown at you, or even just are expected in a way, but it's difficult to plan for. For instance, how fast technology changes, and you need to. We're a workforce development project ourselves, and so that changes very quickly, and we are constantly finding ourselves catching up with that. So one of the things that we found very helpful is that an awful lot of projects, when you're building them and planning for them, focus on a problem and addressing a problem, or helping participants and clients who experience a lot of challenges and problems. And it is important to note those and to help them address them. But you really miss a huge opportunity to make yourself resilient if you don't also pay attention to what the assets are in your clients, in your program, in your geography, and the partners at your table, and actually physically list them out and remember them and build them into your program. It helps your partners come from a much more positive place. It helps them maintain their energy, because it's draining to only think about all the challenges that you're butting up against. One thing that can really help you do that is to make sure that you're using good data. So we're all working with other people's money to a large degree, either government money or foundation. Even if you are creating revenue streams of your own and working on that, every dollar is vitally important. And so you want to make sure your investments are going to something, are going to have the impact you want them to have. So making sure that you're getting good data on both on the beginning end, where you're trying to determine what exactly is the piece of the problem you want to solve. That data is very important. And then vitally important is measuring whether or not your program is having the impact you want. So you want to collect good data as you go as well. This really helps build confidence and trust in your program and its ability to address the needs that you're trying to. Obviously, having the right people at the table is key. I'm sure you make an effort to do that. But even making a special effort to bring in specific expertise that may be lacking at your partnership table. At Team Consortium, we have outstanding partners. We have a broad spectrum of stakeholders, and yet we still find that it's really helpful to reach out across the country and bring in speakers and bring in specific expertise that can really help us move forward. So we don't hesitate to do that, to reach outside ourselves and bring in good expertise when it makes sense to do that. All of that, all of those things, focusing on the positive to keep your momentum, bringing in good data, making sure you're pulling in quality expertise. All of this means that ultimately the thousands of judgment calls you need to make day to day to move your program forward are going to be made on solid ground, on good information with good people. And the quality of those judgment calls and the results of them is what's going to make up the results of your program.
And I think those are all really good points, and I really just enjoy how you framed them all. I was just going to, and we're about to pause for a quick question, but I'm going to ask a question real quickly too. In focusing on the assets, how does that mean that you ignore what the challenges are, or how do you respond to what those challenges, or what should your perspective be on the challenges?
Well, the thing is, no, as I say, it's important. You're trying to address problems. You're trying to overcome challenges or help your clients do so. So obviously, it's key that you pay attention to the problems as well. But what I've found over a series of projects in my career is that when the participants, the clients that you're serving, when they feel like you understand that they have value, that they have input, that they have something to look forward to, that they're not just a bundle of problems to you, that you're, if you do take the approach of, oh, you're living in poverty, we're going to help get you out of that. Oh, you lack these skills, we're going to give you these skills, without the context of what is it that you want to do? What is it that you think you're good at and would like to? Again, you miss an opportunity to really help that person get some agency of their own and feel heard and feel valued. So the outcomes that you get are just across the board better when you're including in a very deliberate way, what are the good things we're working with here too. The same is true with, because you're going to have to engage with public systems usually. And the same thing works on that front. If you are working with those partners and letting them know, wow, this set of services that you provide are really valuable, because, give them good feedback too, not just, oh, this isn't working for me. Again, it seems to really help the project produce better.
Good. Well, great points. Let me just pause there and see, Elise, are there any additional questions from individuals listening today?
Yes, there is a question. Where do you go to get good data?
So sure, no, that's a good question. It's a complicated one though. In our case, as I say, we're a workforce development program, so there are very obvious and long-standing data sources for us. The Bureau of Labor Statistics out of DC, and we work in the 3 states I mentioned, and each state has its own data office, and they do a great job of collecting and analyzing and reporting out on that data. The challenge for us around that has been that the connections that need to be made to serve people happen right at ground level, right where they live and want to work. And the data doesn't always drill down that far. So we end up having to go and spend money on private data companies to come in and do further analysis on the data that we're given. It's not ideal, it's expensive, and we're working actually with the feds and with the states to understand where that gap is for us, so that they can start to maybe get a little more local and a little more real time with the data that we get. Because the thing is, our people, and I'm sure this is true no matter what your program is, it takes time to respond to that data. You have to tweak your curriculum or tweak your case management or whatever to address whatever the data is telling you. So to try to cut that time down so that you can respond quickly, and obviously responding to real data is a piece of resiliency and being able to respond to change. That's why it's so important to get. So as far as where you go to get good data. Whatever area a particular project is working in, if you're in healthcare or human services, or I would look at the agencies within the state and within the federal government that speak directly to your program. They will have program-specific data to help you. And at least in my experience, I've found the people who work within those departments to be hugely helpful. They want to, this is what they get paid to do. And if you call and say, I'm not getting X piece of data, they can help you ferret around and find what you need. So I would go right to those public sources directly and ask if they can help you if you've been having a challenge finding the data you need.
Good information and good kind of resources to be able to really get that granular workforce level data that's needed.
Actually, trade associations also are a really good source. Like if you're in healthcare, there are big trade associations attached to healthcare. Or manufacturing or whatever it is. Go to the trade association websites as well. They will often have very current data on their sites. But again, if you reached out to them, they could probably help. You know, if you're calling from Louisiana, they may be able to drill down in that way for you. So I would look at both sides, the public and the private side, and what's available to you.
Good. Well, let's go on and talk about some of the challenges around partnerships. So the more ambitious an initiative is, the more entities it's going to impact and the more people that are going to have to be involved. And because there are more people that are involved who may have different perspectives, the more likely that initiative could be derailed. So part of the question here is just really in regards to what have you learned about partnership management and change management to help keep projects on track? So I know, again, in terms of this thinking about some of the things that have emerged from our conversations, they tend to be around creating a consensus culture, involving stakeholders, and then also just using neutral parties as well. So I'll turn it back over to you to be able to talk more about each one of these elements.
Sure. So since your question was, what have I learned about partnership management? I've learned that dealing with humans is very complicated. And so just because something worked previously does not necessarily mean it's going to work now. It is complicated. However, partnerships.
You've said that partnerships are like marriages. What works in one marriage context doesn't necessarily work in another context as well. So
that's right.
I didn't interrupt.
That's very true. Not only will what works for one not necessarily be the answer for the other, but also there just isn't a formula. You can't say, I've used the analogy in the past of saying, you can't say to any married couple, if you just do X, Y, Z, you'll be great, because that's not the case. Each case is individual and has their own issues and assets. So really, you have to look at this through the lens of it's about relationships, and relationships are complicated. So, but the fundamental building block of any good set of relationships is trust. So it goes back to what is going to help your partnership build a level of trust and confidence in what you're doing, that you don't have to worry about that piece of it, that you can just focus on the work you need to do together. So I'm actually going to start at number 3 on this and say one of the things that we've learned that really helps a lot is to use a third-party facilitator. In this case, it's me, who is not a partner in the project itself. So me as team director, I don't do any of the program work. I support the partners to do that program work, and they trust me to be a neutral party in their conversations. So going back to number 1 here, this really helps build confidence in creating a consensus culture. One of the things that builds trust the fastest and the firmest among a group, especially if that group is very diverse in their views, which public-private partnerships always are. It really helps to set the tone very early on that we're going to do this as a consensus. This is not going to be team coming in and saying, we're going to do it this way. We're going to take on this project. We don't do that. I've never mandated anything to our partners. We always start at a point of, this is the data, this is the information, these are the challenges and the assets that we're working with. What do you guys in the field, from your stakeholder point of view, what do you feel we should prioritize and address right now? And out of those conversations have come the programming that we've done, the curriculum building, the neighborhood networks, the employer responsive programming. All of it has come from a consensus. And besides just really feeling confident that we have the right programs identified, what it does in this instance, in terms of looking at the partnership itself, is it builds absolute confidence on your partner's side that they're heard, that they have a voice in it. And even if their own point of view didn't prevail at the end of the day, at least they know that they're working in a group that is in agreement. This is what we should be working on together. And maybe next time their point of view will prevail. Involving all the stakeholders is critically important, making sure that every voice is heard, and that's the facilitator's job. So every group is going to have very strong personalities that try to dominate the conversation and weaker personalities that just kind of sit there until they're called on. This does change over time. If it's facilitated properly, you get a much more even keel because everybody starts to understand, actually, the facilitator is going to make sure everybody's voice is heard, so you don't get any one point of view dominating all the time.
And again, we're about to pause for another Q&A session, but I'm going to ask a question real quickly. And I've asked you this before, so I kind of know what you're going to say, but I'm going to ask it anyways because I think it's a really important point, and I think your perspective is really unique on this. So very often for leaders who are, quote unquote, leading the initiative, they can get really tired. They can get their energy drained by trying to lead the group of individuals or this initiative. So what thoughts or comments would you have to individuals who are leaders who are starting to feel drained from trying to kind of catalyze a change initiative?
Well, I don't recall how I responded to you in the past, so you can remind me if you like, but my gut reaction to that is that it's vitally important that a partnership stay in balance. It's all about balance. And so that means delegating things out. You really should not have one or a handful of partners who are, it's fine to step up and take the lead on a piece of it and be accountable for that. That's appropriate. But they should be supported in that as well. And so the whole structure of the partnership needs to be with the understanding that we're going to make sure we're going to support each other, and we're going to make sure that people aren't getting overwhelmed. And also just coming back and finding that common ground consistently, reminding them that, because it can get very overwhelming very quickly if you're not reminding yourself, this is actually our purpose here. Yes, there's this huge piece of scope of challenges, but we're focused on this right now. And when you do that, it makes it manageable for people. Does that reflect what I had said to you before?
That's very consistent with what you've said before. And in this idea of that if you're delegating and if you are really helping individuals to be facilitative leaders, yes, then the weight of the initiative isn't necessarily completely on you. It's much more diffused. Right. And so therefore that helps in terms of preserving some of your energy. So it's very much in the spirit of what you've said.
Okay. Good consistency.
Good. So let's pause there for a minute. Elise, are there any questions from anyone that we want to make sure that we're answering?
Yes, we do have another question. What's it like when you first start a consensus culture? I imagine there are quite a few challenges with such a shift.
If that has not been the case previously, yes, I imagine there would be. So there are actual concrete protocols and approaches that go along with a facilitative leadership model, a consensus building model. One example I can give you that's very concrete and really not that hard to implement is putting in place predictable and fair meeting protocols. I know this sounds really nuts and bolts, but the truth is we spend our life like this in meetings. Now many of them are virtual like this. So really important that time that you're together, really important that it remains productive and doesn't, and it maybe when you're in person, there's even more risk of kind of falling into a chamber social event type of atmosphere rather than a productive meeting. So there are things you can do in terms of structuring your meeting agendas so that, you know, deciding ahead, next time when we meet, we're going to address these 3 things. Do that by consensus. Say, okay, next time we get together, we're going to have an hour together. What 3 things do you want to address? And then have your meeting agenda reflect those 3 things. That reinforces their trust that you're hearing and dealing with the things that they want. And then put times attached to those items so that the first item doesn't end up dominating the entire agenda. So you get to the end of that 20 minutes that the first thing was going to take, and you take a temperature of the room. We're at our limit for this point. Do you want to continue talking about it for 5 more minutes? That will eat into number 2, or do you want to just stop where we are and pick it up later? And let them decide this is how the flow and the balance of priorities is going to go. What it does is remind people and keep them on task in terms of, no, we're actually here to do these specific things. You can have fun doing it, and we definitely do. But we have a goal, even for each individual meeting, there are goals in terms of momentum and moving things ahead. So that's an example of a way that reinforces the consensus culture.
Good. Well, we just have a couple of minutes here, so let's get to the final topic just real quickly. And it's really about disruption and how to handle disruption. And so this final question is just in regards to what are some insights that you can provide in terms of dealing with disruption. And then, again, we've talked about some of these before. So, laying the solid foundation, maintaining alignment, and focusing on the end user. So if you can just take a minute or 2 to provide some additional context around it, that would be great.
Yeah, so I think this really just builds on what we've been talking about already so far. So laying that solid foundation means setting the tone right from the beginning, that this is the way we're going to work together. It's going to be fair. Everybody's going to have a point of view. No one's going to jam their agenda through. And again, reminding each other about this is the common ground that we stand on, and keep coming back to that. If you find yourself, people feel very passionate about mission-driven work, and so it can get emotional and start to drift. So the facilitator's job is to bring it back to that common ground and align that work, because each of those stakeholders needs to feel some productivity and some satisfaction that their piece of it is moving ahead. So again, the facilitator needs to make sure that the work that's being done separately on various fronts it continues to be aligned. And don't forget what your end mission and goals are and your outcomes. That's where interim measurements from an evaluation standpoint become really useful. Because not only will it tell your partners, oh, we are moving forward, and they can feel that satisfaction, but it also lets you, your clients and your funder on both ends, whatever your end goal is, you can feel and see the momentum toward that. So I did want to mention that at Team, we have what we call a spirit of co-opetition. So we understand that people coming to those tables, those strong personalities that I talked to you about, they have their own agenda. They know that they're in competition with some of the people sitting at the table, etc. But we acknowledge that right up front. Yes, some of you are in competition with each other. We will never ask you to betray any proprietary stuff or whatever. but we understand that we're all going to thrive, and our participants and clients will thrive if we're working together. So that understanding keeps things from getting too off track.
All right. Very good. Well, we are unfortunately at time, and if there are questions that are still out there, we will follow up by email to answer those questions. And if you do have additional questions that you want to directly give to Betsy, we're going to put her email in the chat button and also be on the final page as well. But thank you, Betsy, so much for joining us today and sharing with us so much of your knowledge and insights. It's very much appreciated. I did just want to quickly just tell individuals the whole January 26, 2022, hold that time. We'll talk about savvy surveys during our next coffee break webinar. Again, thank you everyone for joining us today, and we will follow up with additional questions. Email Betsy or email us, and we want to make sure that we have information provided for you. Thank you again. Thanks. Bye-bye.